Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a tutorial video on how to change out the Heng Long gearbox on a stock Heng Long T90 Russian main battle tank. A number of years ago, I made a video tutorial similar to this, only I swapped out the gearbox found on a Tiagen Tiger I with a Tiagen ball bearing gearbox. That video, of course, can be found in the video description below. And over the years, that video became quite popular, and I've actually had some requests to do a tutorial gearbox swap out on the T90. Well, since I have the opportunity to work on a T90, I might as well go ahead and film a tutorial on how to swap out the gearbox. This particular model itself is being built for commission, and it's going to be the subject matter of its own model showcase video series, and that will be posted on the ECA channel, and you will also be able to find the links to this project's build videos in the video description listed below. So, in a nutshell, we have here a stock Heng Long RTR T90. This model here is the plastic edition version with the plastic running gear, plastic tracks, and also the plastic sprocket. But most importantly, it does have a plastic gearbox. A really easy upgrade that someone could add to one of these builds is to swap out the gearbox with a metal gearbox. When it comes to metal gearboxes, however, there is a plethora of options on the market. For the purpose of this video here, I'm going to be sticking with the Heng Long platform. And when it comes to swapping out the gearbox, there is something that you do need to look for, and that is the composition of the gears, because not all metal is created evenly. There are some gearboxes out there, primarily on some of the older releases, that are metal upgraded and are sold as such, and those gears are made out of components made from zinc alloy. At face value, zinc alloy seems like it's an awesome material for a gearbox. However, that's not the case, because zinc alloy will strip out. I've seen it a multitude of times, and in fact, I even have a situation where that happened to me on a video where I was driving a Heng Long model, and the gearbox just crapped the bed on it. So, when you're looking for a gearbox, avoid the zinc glass jaw gearbox and definitely opt for gears made in steel. Steel is your best friend for gearboxes, and that's something you should definitely look for. The replacement gearbox in question I'm going to use are these units that we have here. These are ones that are procured off of the internet, and these things are found basically everywhere. You can find them on Amazon, you can find them on eBay, AliExpress, Toucan, whatever. These things are very prolific, and they're also really affordable when found. In order to tell, by the way, if your gearbox is a steel gearbox versus a glass jaw, you can tell really easily by just looking at the gears. And if you take a little magnet, and if the magnet sticks, presto, you got steel gears. And that is definitely something you want to see. There are, like I stated before, many other options out there for gearboxes. Some are way more advanced than others. Like, for instance, the Tiagen counterparts have the ball bearing axle supports in them. This one here is just bushings. And there are also some other higher end ones out there from Germany. It's a big surprise. And those ones are definitely a great option. But for the purpose of this build over here, the standard Heng Long one should be more than suffice. So, in order to do a gearbox change, the very first thing you need to do is to take the upper off of the lower. On the Heng Long T90 here, this is facilitated by a number of fasteners that are found on the bottom portion of the vehicle. They're Phillips head fasteners, and they come off really easily as long as you have the appropriate screwdriver, which, if you're doing RC stuff, it would be a good investment to get one. Currently, those fasteners have already been removed, and the upper is not attached to the lower in a secure manner at this point, as you can clearly see. To do the gearbox change itself, you can do this in one of two ways. You could do it the more advanced way or the simplistic way. The advanced way is where you unplug all these connections from the motherboard that we have over here. Then that will thoroughly separate the upper from the lower, and then that'll give you more free access to work on the model. However, if you are, say, a bit overwhelmed with, trying to work with the octopus that we have here, fear not, you can still change the gearbox out, but it's going to be a little bit more cumbersome, but the job can still be done regardless. And for the purposes of this video, we'll go ahead and do it the quote-unquote easier way. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I need to take the tracks off. The tracks have to come off in order to get to the sprockets as well as to get to the gearbox. And to do that, one feature that I like to do on all of my builds is I like to prop the tank up on some sort of a working block. This will prevent the thing from rolling around and just makes maneuvering of the vehicle during construction a bit easier. For my working block, I just utilize just this piece of styrofoam over here. This is from the Armortech speakers that I usually have floating around. And as you can see, this one has built a number of tanks already. But you could use anything from a block of wood to just some, scrap styrofoam for some packaging, what have you. The best thing, as long as it cradles the center portion of the hull. So I'm just going to put this down and set this on top like so. At this point here, the tank is not making contact with the table, so I could work on this thing without having the worry of this thing rolling around. With the tank jacked up, it's now time to start the actual removal process. So I'm going to lift the upper hull off of the model and just put it on this side over here. And at this point now I have full view and access to the sprocket. The sprocket is held in place on this model here with a Allen fastener. This is something that you're going to need to have the tooling to remove, but fortunately finding Allen wrenches is something that's really, really easily done. If you go to places like Harbor Freight, or even if you go on Amazon.com, shouldn't be too hard to track down some sort of a set to work on this type of model that we have here. For me, I have this little handy little set here. I've been utilizing this for a number of years, and it's one that is actually very handy. You just have to play musical chairs or Cinderella with the wrench until you find the one that's the right size, and then once you do, off to the races you go. So you're going to go ahead and unthread the fastener that's right here on the sprocket. Now, by the way, in addition to swapping out the gearbox, I'm also going to be swapping out the track and the sprocket with metal ones, and I'll touch upon that momentarily. But for the time being, you basically undo the fastener that you have right here. And once the unit is fully unthreaded, you basically could just remove it. At this point here, it would behoove you to go ahead and keep a Ziploc bag on hand, because these are the type of things that get lost very, very easily. With the fastener removed, it's now time to remove the track, and that's done by grabbing the sprocket and just simply lifting it off. Sprocket comes off. I'll quickly put this in the Ziploc bag fastener, and then the track just simply peels away at that point as well. With this removed, the only thing you have to do is just repeat the exact same step on the reverse side. There is no Loctite or anything to contend with. The fastener is just purely held down with basic torque. Okay. With the tracks removed, it's now time to get to the removal of the gearbox. The gearbox is held in place with a number of fasteners, two of which are easy to get to, and one's over here on this side, and the other one's right behind the motor on this side. The others are contained underneath the gearbox themselves, and these are accessible through the top portion. On the more recent release of Heng Long models, they have these plastic dust covers in place, which do a fantastic job, and it's a nice feature, but for this type of application over here, they tend to get in the way, but are fortunately really easy to remove. These are just clipped on in place. And after a little bit of wiggling, they come right out. Do the same to the one on the opposite side. Like so. So with the covers out of the way, you now get a better view at the fasteners that we need to deal with. One of them was right here, like I mentioned. The other two are right there and right there, and the same is also true for the one on the opposite side. In order to remove this, you need a Phillips head screwdriver, and when you're using a Phillips screwdriver, make sure you have the right one. I know this sounds pretty weird, but not all Phillips screwdrivers are created evenly. There are some out there that have different shaped heads on them, and this can potentially cause problems because you can wind up stripping the screw, and that's not helping anybody. So make sure you have the appropriate screwdriver for the job at hand. Once you are ready to remove the fasteners, just go in here, and you just start unscrewing everything. None of these fasteners are held in place with Loctite or anything like that. It's just, torqued into the appropriate locations. It would also help to have a little plier on hand, like this one here, to help grab the fastener when it's been removed, and prevent it from running around loose on the inside, also prevent it from getting lost. The fasteners themselves, again, put in a nice little Ziploc bag where you can easily grab them and keep them on hand. Once one is taken care of, do the same thing to the gearbox on the opposite side. The way these systems are, one tends to anchor the other one in place, so you need to remove all the fasteners, and then you could start with the removal process in a sequential type manner. Once the fasteners are removed, you can now wiggle the gearboxes out. And you want to start with the one here on the, which would be the left-hand side, and then the one on the right should follow. Just like so. The gearboxes are held in place with their cables, and we have two cable straps right here on the inside. These here have to be opened up in order to get access to the quick connect jacks, which is very relevant because I'm going to be pointing that out in a moment. The cable straps are just soft aluminum, so you can just bend them out of the way, like such. And now, the gearboxes have been fred. At this point here, it's now time to swap out the electrical connections, which are right here on the front. The beauty about these RTR systems is that no soldering is required. You basically just plug and play it, which is fantastic. One location where you want to pump your brakes is with this area over here. As you can see, there's a lot of little plugs here, and this can get confusing pretty quickly. So in order to prevent any sort of confusion, what you do not want to do is just start unplugging stuff willy-nilly. That is something that's not going to be really beneficial. In order to make the swap out as efficient and as smooth as possible, you want to do it one at a time. And what I mean by that is you literally find the gearbox, like this one right here, and I unplug it one at a time. With these wires unplugged, this gearbox now has been fred. I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to find the steel counterpart, and I'm just going to plug this unit in, making sure that the corresponding colors line up. This is the best way to prevent any sort of confusion when you're undertaking a swap out like this. This one now is all taken care of. Now I just repeat the steps with the other one. When you're installing the jacks, make sure that they have that audible click. Hopefully that came out on camera. Making sure that the units are fully seated. You can do a tug test or two just to make sure everything is where it needs to be. You'll be surprised how many times people do this and they go through the motions and the tank stops working, doesn't work all the way, and they're completely confused, and simply because the jacks aren't plugged in. So definitely keep that in mind. With the new steel gearboxes patched in with the electronics, it's time to line them back up into their appropriate locations. But before I do, let me get rid of this crap in the way. Okay. So here we have the gearbox itself. It's going to index onto several of these little pegs that we have here on the lower hull. These are just used to align the unit to make sure it seats in properly, and then to line up the fastener locations when it comes time for the remounting them to the model. So I take my unit right here, wiggle it in, and drop it in place. When you're reinstalling the gearbox, you want to go from right to left as opposed to the other way where it was left to right. And once everything lines up, the gearboxes are seated back in place. The wires are going to be cleaned up after the bolts are re-added in place, so stay tuned for that. But at this point here, we are now ready to start with the gearbox remounting. For mounting the fasteners back in place, you just simply reverse the procedure, of course. On some builds in the past, I utilized Loctite on these fasteners just to prevent them from potentially working themselves loose while the model's in operation. However, with the model being plastic, that's not necessarily something that you may want to do, as I've heard reports in the past that Loctite can actually cause problems with the plastic. So instead of using standard Loctite, you can buy, by the way, plastic safe Loctite. That is stuff that's sold on Amazon. I don't have any on hand at the moment, so I'm going to use the next best thing, and that is super glue. Just a small little drop of glue will effectively do the same exact thing as the Loctite would. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and grab my fasteners and start with the remounting process. I also want to mention that if you have a magnetic screwdriver, this is something that could potentially be a double-edged sword. Yeah, it's really handy in keeping the fastener in place, and it helps you align it with the mounting. However, with the sidewall of the gearbox being steel and with the gears being steel, the gearbox is going to want to suck the screwdriver into it in one shape or another. This is also going to be true with dealing with the magnetic field from the motor. So as you can see, this one's already trying to stick to it. And when you're trying to mount the fasteners on, you are going to have a little bit of resistance to fight from the electric motor. But, you know, it's not something that's impossible to take care of. In order to get the piece in place, I have my plier over here. Use a longer reach plier. That would be helpful as well, but you know, I just got this little one for the time being. I'm going to add just a little drop of super glue. You don't want to add a whole lot. Just a little drop is more than enough for what you're trying to accomplish. Well, this is an interesting turn of events. So after the last scene, I went ahead and remounted the gearboxes with the kit supply fasteners, and I filmed all that and went through without a hitch. The problem is, as it turns out, the gearboxes that were supplied with me when I started this project are the wrong ones. These are not for the Heng Long T90. They are for some other different type of vehicle. Heng Long does have quite a wide range of tanks, and this gearbox here is not for the T90. The problem is that the stems here for the axles, for the sprockets, are too short. So this is something I'm actually glad this happened, because this is something that can easily happen to you. If you're buying one of these gearboxes, double check and make sure you're buying the appropriate ones for the tank you're working on. However, that's not going to be a problem because I have the replacement gearboxes on hand, and I'm going to go ahead and swap them out for the correct one. Just a minor inconvenience, but regardless, at least it happened on video, so it's a cautionary tale, so that if you're working on one of these models, this is something you can easily have happen to you, and it's best to avoid. Fortunately, tracking down a replacement gearbox is definitely not hard to do. I just went on eBay or Amazon, I think it was eBay, and I just picked up the set that we have here. This is the appropriate set here for the T90. Specifically, this is the item number right over there. So if you are working on one of these vehicles, be sure this is the gearbox that you get, and I wouldn't be surprised if T72 utilized the exact same system. As for these units over here, don't feel bad. These are more likely going to be reused on another Heng Long project that comes along my shop, as I generally have a revolving door of Heng Longs and other 116s that come into the shop that are being built either for myself or for private commission. That means a casting set's ready to go. But regardless, I have a revolving door of builds coming in via commission or from my own collection, so chances are really good you will be seeing these making their appearance in another video down the road. But for this video over here, these guys here, it's time for them to have their bow out. So I'm going to go ahead and replace them with this gearbox. I'm going to do the replacement the same exact way that I did the previous one, where I carefully unplug and plug the new one in order to prevent any sort of confusions on which gearbox gets connected to which terminal. So no point getting that on camera, I already showed that earlier. Let's go ahead to cut across where the gearboxes are already plugged in and they're actually ready for final installation. So the fasteners went in. The gearboxes are now permanently attached to the model, and I could go ahead and test the fitting of the sprocket, which I have right over here. Find that sweet spot, and boom, there we go. Huzzah! The gearbox is the correct one for this vehicle. So from this point onward, well, normally, if you were just swapping out the gearbox and doing nothing else to the model, you would, at this point, remount the upper to the lower with those fasteners that are kit supplied. And then you can go ahead and remount on the tracks, be it, or the sprockets, be it the original kit plastic ones, or these metal versions that we have right here. At this time here, I might as well do a quick tutorial on how to install the metal sprockets and the track, because I'm pretty sure this is a fairly popular hop-up for these models, and there may be one or two people out there trying to figure out how this gets fitted in place. So the sprockets are a three-piece assembly where we have the two tooth rings as well as a center guide tooth aligner, and basically they just fit together as such. Luckily, you cannot put this on reverse with the way the component is shaped. There is a taper to it, and if you try to put it in reverse, it's just not going to fit in place. If you are trying to put this into this location here, fumbling with it, stop. Do not do any sort of modifications or hand fitting. All you gotta do is simply just flip it around and the piece will seat properly like you just seen me do just now. On this component over here, you could just line up the two halves as such. These guys need to find their happy little sweet spot. And when they do, the sprocket is now assembled. Keep in mind, normally I'll put a little drop of super glue in this section over here and glue this in place. However, because these are going to be painted and primed, I'm not going to go ahead and show that at this time. But if you want to keep these in a more snug manner, that's one tip I recommend. So then these guys here just simply slide into place. With the way the sprockets are in these models, we have a nice flat section here on the shaft, and that will correspond with a matching location right here on the inner sprocket. And it doesn't matter if you're working on a Heng Long, a Tiagen, or a Matto. Basically, all of these 1/16s follow the same format. In order to secure these sprockets in place, here we have a little bag that's supplied with the metal track, and it contains some new replacement fasteners. These are the type of things that easily get lost, so I'm just going to go ahead and pour them in this little Dixie cup over here, just to prevent them from getting lost. Fasteners for the sprockets do have a small little lock washer on them. Now these are an M3 hex bolt. That's basically the standard for these components. So you just want to find a Allen wrench that is the appropriate size. And by the way, there is a little lock washer. As you can see, I slipped it on this section over here. Normally on my builds, I put a little drop of blue Loctite on this and thread it in place. But again, because this is just for temporary show and tell, this is not going to be done at this time. But rest assured, as the model gets built and painted, it will definitely be getting that little procedure. Also, unlike the Gearbox mounts, which are made out of plastic, this is metal on metal, so you don't have to worry about any sort of problems with the use of the Loctite. But I would hazard against using red Loctite or a whole lot of red Loctite in case you ever have to take the sprocket off. It's a bit easier if you don't use, or if you have just a finite amount of the red stuff on hand. Red is the strongest Loctite, and the blue is intermediate, and I think purple is like the weakest holding one. So for sprockets, I would recommend using some of the weaker type thread locks compared to the red stuff. So you just tighten this guy down, and you're good to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is show the installation of the front idler. This is held onto the tank with a Phillips screw. So you just unthread this. Make sure you don't lose that screw. You don't really need it anymore, but once the wheel is removed, you can see the metal spindle right here, and the track tension is adjustable, as you can see with that screw. You loosen this and you can adjust the track tension to where you deem fit. Here you can see the new metal idler that's going to be mounted to this model. Compare and contrast with the original kit supply one. Both have the same dimensions and the same overall detailing on them, which is great. The difference is with, of course, the materials. Also, one other thing to mention, the kit one has a brass bushing, so it's metal on metal, which is a good feature. However, the aftermarket one supplies you with a ball bearing as opposed to the bushing. And by the way, there are two ball bearings per wheel. One goes here on a inner recess, and the other one goes here on the outer recess. Then you just slip it onto the axle, like you see. And you can see exactly why a ball bearing is better for this application. Another thing you could do is a quick trick that I like to use on my builds. I put a little smear of grease on the axle over here. It just helps with the performance of the part. It helps it easily, or it helps the piece easily install, and also protect the metal here from any sort of corrosion that could potentially happen as the model is driven and it ages. To secure the wheel in place, this is done with the same screw from before. The kit does give you, I should say the hop-up set does give you two extras, so you can either recycle the kit ones or roll with a new set. It's up to you. Like I mentioned before, I would be using Loctite on this to install this permanently in place, but for the purposes of this video, you get the idea. And you just tighten this guy down, and you're all set. To install the track, I am going to have to retake the sprocket off, and that's because unlike some of the other builds like the Tiger I or even the Pershing with the Matto tracks, where you can actually take the track link apart via the two end connectors, on the T90 here that's not going to be the case. If you look at the track, it's a single molded link right here. Even though it looks like it's a multi-part assembly, it's actually not. And these two sections here are integrally molded into the link, and because of that, you're not going to be able to simply yank the two end connectors off and take apart the track to mount it in that manner. So to mount it, we're going to have to go ahead and mount it basically like a bicycle chain on your bike. So I'm going to go ahead and temporarily remove this guy over here. Just going to undo just this bolt from last time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mount the rear section of the sprocket back onto the axle. I'm going to take the track and just line it up. If the piece is on in a very tight manner, you can always loosen the front idler, but as you can see, these things are basically designed to fit with the correct tension from the get-go. Okay, so once you overlap the sprocket and time it onto the track, it's then time to go ahead and secure the outer section of sprocket, just like so. And once this guy's tightened in place, you should have the track now fully installed to the model. As you can see, it has a little bit of extra links to it, which is actually pretty appropriate for a vehicle like this. From what I saw, the stock track length on the plastic one, which is the same size as this one over here, worked just fine. I was able to drive the model around, mess around with it a little bit before filming, and she ran like a top. So I'm not really sure if there's going to be any problems with the need to tighten up the track, but if you do have to tighten up the track, again, that's done via the front idler that we have here. You loosen this screw, and then from there you have access to the idler adjuster that I showed before, and that's basically all there is to it. So at this point here, you could go ahead and put the upper hull back on. Oh, I briefly want to mention, if you are going to install the track, it's probably best to install this before the upper hull is secured in place because of that side skirt that we have. With the way you have to kind of manhandle it, with the side skirt in the way, it is doable, but it's going to take a little bit more work compared to when the piece is in this type of format that we have here. So it's at this point now I could go ahead and swap the track out on the opposite side, and then I would be able to secure everything in place. But before I do, there is one last thing I do want to show. The last thing I want to mention goes back to the interior here with the wiring. As you can see, the wiring is a bit of an untangled mess thanks to swapping out the gearbox. So one thing that's a really nice habit to get into is if you do a procedure like this, it's time to organize the wires a little bit. That's really easily done with just a little pack of zip ties over here. You can find them any hardware store, and they are very, very affordable. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and zip tie a lot of these things together. And this should do wonders in just keeping the inside a little bit more organized compared to the way we have it here. And as you can see, after a few zips here and there, does the job pretty well. You want to, by the way, have a little bit of slack over here just so that if you take the upper and lower off, the CPU can go ahead and lift off with it. Otherwise, it could cause some problems. And from here, you can just go ahead and tuck everything in where it needs to go appropriately. And then you can go ahead and get the upper and lower hulls back fitted together as one piece. As so. At this point here, I would secure on the mounting fasteners on the bottom of the model. But obviously that's not going to be needed right now because I just have to take the upper off just so that I could go ahead and continue with the remainder of the build. As you can see, the installation of the gearbox on one of these Heng Long models is actually really straightforward and is pretty easily done, as long as, granted, you have the correct gearbox. That's probably the most important thing. But with a minimum amount of tools, you can easily go ahead and do the installation of not just the gearbox, but also the metal tracks like I've done in this video. From here, the model can progress further with its detailing and paintwork, but I'm going to leave that information for the model showcase video series for this exact same build that will be posted on this channel shortly after or shortly before this video here makes its debut. And with that, that wraps up this tutorial video for the Heng Long 1/16 scale metal gearbox, as well as the metal track for the T90 Russian main battle tank. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. By subscribing to this channel, it's a great way to keep updated on new posted content, being 1/16 scale tutorial videos like this one over here, or the other 1/16 scale and smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted, or my other content being 1/6 scale project update videos when they get posted as well. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have photographs of the other 1/16 scale models that I've built in the past, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel previously. Also, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.